First time I'm doing this, so welcome to this experiment in live streaming. What I'm going to do today is talk a bit about dreams and get into a little bit of how the world shows up in our dreams and some things you can do about that. A few things first as we go. So I'm thinking about having these regularly. So if you like that idea, let me know. What I have in mind is maybe one every couple of weeks or even every other week, just to talk about different aspects of things that I work on. So we'll see how that goes. Also, I'm going to alternate between presenting a little bit, maybe for 20 minutes or so, but I'm going to go back and forth between that and looking at the chat. And my reason for doing that is I can't do both at once. I'm a terrible multitasker, but I'm good at switching back and forth. So I'll say a little bit, and then I will ask for some, Q&A and all that, and we can have some discussion. So that's what I had planned. And just a reminder to go to my YouTube channel here to subscribe if you want updates, and also at chalkwist.com. If you hang out there for like 10 or 15 seconds, there's a pop-up and it gives you access to signing up for my events newsletter, which I send out once a month, but I might start sending out special editions just for things like this to let people know. So that's what I have in mind. All right. So in terms of dreams, a little bit of basic stuff first, and then we'll get into the other part where outer events show up. There is there's a tendency among science writers on dreams to say that they have some kind of new information to offer, usually neurological, and then they say dreams are mysterious. People have been trying to understand them forever, and no one really understands them, and that's just not true. You can always tell that the science writer doesn't do dream work, because those of us who do don't really have that hard of a time understanding dreams. Your own dreams are hard to understand. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Now, we have to distinguish between neurological explanations of dreams and psychological. So I'm going to be talking mostly about psychological. Yeah, we know something about the neurology of dreams. It's interesting stuff, actually. But it doesn't explain the content of our dreams. For that, we have to go to psychology. So a little bit about that. Dreams have their own way of speaking, their own language, and it's metaphoric. They speak in symbols. So as a result, if we're locked into a literal-minded daytime consciousness, it's very difficult to understand our dreams. They just seem bizarre. And so I'm thinking about an engineer I worked with some years ago back in my therapy days who used to complain to me that by day, he had his job, he was a very good engineer, a lot of linear thinking, which is required for that position. And then at night, his dreams were very colorful and emotional. And I said, well, of course they are, because that's all the stuff you don't allow yourself to do during the day, right? And here I'm leaning a bit on Carl Jung's explanation for psychological explanation for why we dream, which is to achieve wholeness, to achieve health. Our dreams bring back to us what we miss experientially during the day or during the week. So that's one reason that we dream. There's others too, as we'll see. But if we know those two things, that dreams compensate us, they bring back what we ignore, and that they speak symbolically, and that our own associations to each of the dream symbols can help us understand what they mean, it'll go a long way toward helping us work with dreams. And I recommend doing this in groups because, like I said, your own dreams are the hardest to understand. And it's often very helpful to have somebody else say, well, the symbol here reminds me of, and then it might resonate with you. Dream books are not terribly helpful for this. They tend to say, this means that. I would go by what resonates. If you're looking at a dream book and it says that a car in a dream means ego consciousness or your drive through the world or whatever, I would go by, does that resonate? And if it doesn't, I would stick with what cars remind you of and what the dream car reminded you of, and go by that as a meaning. And that's one of the ways we decipher dreams. We unlock the meaning of the symbols through associating to them. There's other ways too. There's things like, where does the dream show up in your body, and what is your body symbolically saying about different aspects of the dream, for instance. So for those of you who've worked a lot with dreams, this is all pretty basic. It's not, like I said, that hard to understand the basic meaning of dreams. But where things get interesting, I think, is where dreams have more to say than about your own personal life and psychology. So I was, in preparation for this, I like to do brush up work whenever I present something and look over the neurology and stuff like that, which I won't get into in this. But I came across a channel on YouTube by a Gestalt dream worker who was saying every symbol in the dream is you. So that's one level. That's one way of looking at it. But I'm looking at the dreams today where they're not you, or where they're you but you something and something else, something from outside. So, which I actually think is a bit more interesting, depending. So let's talk about those dreams. Now, some of you might know that these dreams, which I refer to as world dreams are when the world comes in. The more than you shows up, whether that's the world of nature, the world of current events, the world of current historical things happening, whatever it is. So if you studied the history of science at all, you know that many scientific discoveries were prompted by dreams. So the biologist Kukule dreaming up the benzene ring as an answer to a question he was asking. He was pursuing what the structure of it was, and the dream gave him the hint. And I think it actually gave him more than a hint, because he dreamed of an Ouroboros, which is one of those snakes that has its tail in its teeth. So I think there was more to it than just, here's the benzene ring. And likewise with Einstein, he got a hint for relativity theory by dreaming that he was running downhill faster than light. So there's symbolism there that we could unpack if we had time, but a long history of this. So one of the things about dreams is that they bring us outer world answers to things that we're wrestling with. So, but that's still mostly about us, right? But another thing too about world dreams is that they cue us in on collective situations. So some years back, shortly before Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, I had a dream about it. So when he actually got elected, I wasn't surprised. And in the dream, there was this voice that was like the voice of a god. And it said, you, meaning the United States, you're in a civil war, you know. So the Civil War is a meme that's come up from different quarters. People are talking about it in different ways. But what I think the dream was preparing me for was a divided country. And there's no hint that it's going to be undivided anytime soon. There's a huge split in the American psyche and American culture right now. So sometimes world dreams show up to prepare us to respond to a collective situation, to adapt. And I think that that's one of the reasons that dream showed up. So if we use the usual dream work method and say, well, what about me and my civil war and all that? I didn't feel particularly self-divided at the time I had the dream. And that's one of the reasons I don't think it was primarily about me. There may have been some conflict or self-division in me. And one thing that occurs is that I grew up in a very conservative white family. And I've gone in different directions since then, politically and otherwise. So there's that fact, that psychic fact of where I came from. So that might be part of the mix. But in any case, I think that dream was more about the collective situation. Now, there are flood and catastrophe dreams that don't always unfold in actual floods and catastrophes, but sometimes they do. And it can be terrifying to have a dream where you dream about some massive flood, and then excuse me, the next day or a couple of days going forward, you have a dream in which it actually happens somewhere. We'll talk more about what that might mean in a minute. I just want to give you some examples of world dreams here. So those show up. There's a dream that Jung had, and I talk more about this in a video I'll mention in a moment. There's a video on demand I'm selling on this topic, and I'll say a little bit about it, but I don't want to turn this whole thing into an ad. So at one point, I think it was 1927, I know it was the 1920s, in Jung's Black Book journals, he wrote that the climate was changing. That was his dream. The climate is changing, and it's bringing about a catastrophe. So 1920s, right, which was before even some of the science that we now have in abundance was talking about climate change. So that would be a great example of a world dream. And then another example, and then we'll get to what might, actually we'll pause for questions, but another example would be how the presence of certain places shows up in personified form, in other words, as a dream character. So places that I've lived, like San Diego, where I was born, have often showed up in my dreams as characters, and I know who they are because either they identify themselves or they tell me things about themselves that I know are connected to those places. So I've often had the experience of when I go someplace new, right before I arrive, the place itself shows up in my dream in some form or other and says, here's something that you need to know about this place. And it turns out to be true. So parapsychology is a field that in part came out of all this. And so you might want to look that up online. Plus, I have a ton of free parapsychological inquiry videos in YouTube, so those are available as well. But parapsychology studies how the things of the world are also inside us, and how what we sometimes take as personal moods, personal conflicts, things like that, accurately and symbolically echo things that are happening in the world, the natural world in particular. So those are some examples of what I've been calling world dreams. You could probably think of others, but as I mentioned earlier, I want to pause here and invite some Q&A. And so there's a delay here that YouTube imposes, and then I'm using some other software on top of it to do this presentation. So there might be as much as a 20 to 30 second delay between us. So I'm going to say a little bit about the video I mentioned while you're putting questions up, and then I'll go ahead and read those in the chat. So the video I mentioned is called When the World Shows Up in Your Dreams, and it's over on in Vimeo, where I have a page. So if you go to Vimeo and you look up my last name, it should pull it up. And so that's actually a set of videos, not just one video. It's 3.5 hours of video, and it's on different aspects of working with world dreams. So if that's of interest, you might go over and have a look at that. So I also give in one of the videos a 12-step dream method that I've been using for a number of years to work with all kinds of different dreams on many different levels. So not just intellectually or mentally, but physically, ecologically, archetypally, things like that. So that's in the video too. And it has some things as well on dreams of place and planet. There's a whole piece on that. Reading the dream of the world is the last video. There's 6 videos. So just wanted to mention that. I thought I was selling it last week actually, and then I realized that I hadn't hit a key button to launch it, so I've now done that. So it should be available. So I'm not seeing any questions, so I'll go ahead and go to the second part of what I wanted to bring you today, which is what do you do about these world dreams? And I'll try to keep an eye out in the chat here as I go. Hopefully I won't get too lost. But so what do you do about this? So one thing that's really important to remember when you have one of these world dreams is that it's probably not a call to some kind of heroic action in the world. And what I mean by that is, let's have an example that comes up all the time where somebody dreams that a war is going to break out or there's going to be this natural catastrophe, and you wake up and you're in a panic and you're saying to yourself, I got to warn people. I don't think that's the purpose of the dream at all. An exception to this would be members, this has happened, members of A smaller group of people, and thanks Lola, I see your question. I'll get to that in a second. There's a smaller group of people, and then the medicine person has a dream that there's a tsunami coming in, so they move the village. And this has happened bunches of times, right? So in that case, the dream might be one that it would be urgent to tell other people about. But when it's a big catastrophe, it's probably better to think of other ways of holding that. And I have some ideas about that in just a second. So Lola's question, how do you tell the difference between a world dream and a personal dream? Great question. It's hard to sometimes. You have to actually unpack the imagery and the symbolism. And you also have to keep an eye on the news. So there's been many times when I've had a dream where I thought it was just my own personal dream and the imagery seemed to read that way. And then 2 days later or a week later, there's a news item that perfectly parallels the dream I just had. And I think, oh, this was actually way bigger than me, right? So I think there's some overlap sometimes. I wouldn't make an absolute distinction between personal dreams and world dreams. Sometimes it's more one or the other. So I would make that distinction. But it's in the imagery and the symbolism and whether it lines up with something that happens in the outer world. I would look at it that way. But having said that, I would also not neglect the possible personal dimension. So years ago, I was an administrator at a school that got, first of all, evacuated by wildfires and then basically isolated from the rest of the world by floods. And so those of us at the school who thought symbolically were thinking about this on different levels. Like, what does it mean in terms of the group at the school, the group psychology of the school? Where's the wildfire in me? Where's the flooding in me? Things like that, And as a matter of fact, that period foreshadowed a lot of what I would think of as professional breakdown and breakthrough in terms of moving on to career positions that were more satisfying. So there was a personal element to it, but I think it was more collective. So great question. And then another question, can the feeling and scope in a world dream be different, or is it a matter of interpreting it later? I think sometimes it is different. So I wish we had more information about Jung's climate change dream. Things like, how did it feel in the dream? Was there a feeling of catastrophe? Was there a mood that went with it? But sometimes it doesn't show up that way. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I could speculate about it, but oftentimes world dreams feel weightier, but not always. So it depends. So in terms of dealing with these, it's not necessarily a heroic call to action. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're supposed to go out and warn everybody. And would that work, really? There was this article that Edward Edinger, the Jungian analyst, wrote after one of the terrorist attacks. This was pre-9/11 in the United States. And for some reason, I think it was published by the New York Times, if I remember right. Can't imagine why they published it. It was, if you didn't have a Jungian background, you had no hope of understanding what this article said. And it was talking about, warning the public about the archetypal basis of zealotry in terrorism and, what the self is up to with a capital S and all this other stuff. And I don't know if he had a dream about it and decided he needed to warn everybody, but it was a completely ineffectual warning, as we saw later in 9/11. So I don't think it's necessarily about that. So give yourself a little grace and don't panic if you have one of these world dreams that look catastrophic. It may be more along the lines of sensitizing you to important shifts in collective consciousness. That seems to be more the underlying meaning. So another way of saying this is that world dreams seem to emphasize that you're a witness and not a victim. Some people feel quite victimized by these dreams and other similar experiences where they're sensitive to shifts in collective consciousness. But there's more, I think, witness psychology that we can step up into rather than that. That there's a reason that we're tuned into these things that doesn't involve I have to snap into heroic action, right? So a good question to ask would be, why you? Why is this dream visiting you if it doesn't intend you to go warn everybody from the housetops? So if we use the example of Jung and his climate change dream, part of it might be that he was actually an early eco-psychologist, an early theorist and practitioner who brought the ecological world into psychology. So he needed the connection too, at some level. Also, the dream, it didn't see the light of day until a few years ago when the Black Books were published. So it may have been a dream that was waiting around for our time. And that happens as well. So those could be two of the reasons why a dream like that would seek Jung out. It could be that if the dream was telling him you need to pay more attention to the collective situation in the sense of educating people about it. Because in that same journal entry, which I talk about in the video on demand I mentioned, when the world shows up in your dreams, there's some comments that he made about this dream. They're very brief, but at one point he says, maybe I should be lecturing in the universities rather than just working individually. So Jung was ahead of a lot of us in having that same thought, that individual therapy might not be enough for an ailing world. So that might have been another reason for him having that dream, to mobilize him into more action outside the consulting room. And in fact, he did teach classes at the university. So another thing to do with these dreams is to interpret the symbolism of the events. A lot of it has to do with changes in collective consciousness, as I mentioned earlier. So if you're dreaming that a volcano blows up, or there's a flood, or a tornado, or a war, or whatever, think about it in symbolic terms and ask questions like, where's the tornado happening in the collective, in the group? And what might that mean? And how might I detect that? What might it look like in the news, for instance? So that would be a good way of dealing with dreams like that. So a couple more things about this, and then I want to kind of give this over to any questions you have. So go ahead and start typing them out now, and I'll cover a couple of more things. So another thing you can do with these is to share dreams with kindred souls who understand that our dreams are sometimes bigger than we are. That can be very helpful, and you can get some really good feedback from other people too. People who themselves have had these kinds of dreams. There's something normalizing about being able to talk to people about it. And then another thing to consider is to form a world dreaming group. And it doesn't require that everybody who comes in always has a world dream, because of course that's not under our control. But maybe there's one dream that feels big, that people want to deal with, and maybe they want ongoing tools, maybe you do, for dealing with dreams like this, even if they don't pop up all the time. So I don't know of any such groups now. I know that Jungian dream circles sometimes look for synchronicity in dreams. So when you dream about something and it happens outwardly, but specifically about world dreaming, I don't know that there's a group, but you might think about putting one together. So that would be a resource. So that's most of what I wanted to give you in this experimental live stream today. And then let me finish by just, before I go to the Q&A, if there's any more questions, let me mention the 6 chapters of that video that I can't even remember the price. I think it's $40 videos, 6 videos that I'm selling over at Vimeo. So the first video is some practical dream theory. And it also answers questions like, how come we don't always dream and stuff like that. Second is the 12-fold dream method I mentioned earlier. Third is the whole relationship of myths and dreams. Fourth, dreams of place and planet. Fifth, dream oddities and quirky themes. So strange things that happen in dreams, like what does it mean when you are dreaming that you're dreaming, for instance. And then lastly, reading the dreams of the world. So that's the list I have of what's in that video. So let's see here. I'll give this a minute to see if there's any more questions, and then I think this will be good for now. But this was fun to do. Sorry, I had a bit of trouble at the beginning with the audio. I'm using some new tech here, and I did test it, but sometimes you test it and it doesn't work anyway. So see if I can get it right next time. So let's see, any further questions here? Going once. And I'll just I'll mention too that or repeat rather that I'm thinking about making this a customary practice. So let me know what you think about that. Um, so and yes, Lola, go ahead and I'll type that in too. Sorry, my throat's a little weird today. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long. I'm going to do this a little bit differently the next time I stream it. I'm not gonna use the extra software. I'm gonna do it straight up through YouTube, and that'll eliminate some of this irritating delay. I think YouTube imposes, if I remember correctly, something like a 10 to 15 second delay rather than this longer one that we're having to deal with. So we'll see about that and how that goes. Um, Trying to think if there's anything I want to tell you about this. Oh, while I'm waiting for Lola's question, I want to mention one other thing too, which is sometimes people show up in your dreams. This actually happened to me last night, and it raises the question of, am I actually dreaming about that person? So, same thing with other kinds of world dreams, dreams where the external world comes in. Is it really about that? So, there's something that the unconscious does to give us a hint, which is it makes it, if it's more about us or more about something archetypal happening, it changes the external features a little bit. So here's an example. I've had a number of recent dreams about the archetypal figure of what we could call the mage, M-A-G-E, and I include in that wizard, sorcerer, alchemist, and all that. That figures up for me a lot lately. So last night, I dreamed of an old mentor who I haven't talked to in quite a long time. He was a professor of mine in undergrad literature, and I actually learned more psychology in his class and just more wisdom than in any of the undergrad psych classes I took. And so I was having a conversation with him last night. It seemed like him last night in a dream. But when I woke up, the figure I had been talking to had longer hair than he does, and his hair was brown instead of black. And so that was a little hint to me, I think, that I was talking to this archetypal figure rather than my old mentor. So that might be something to think about too. So I'm going to finish with this last question here. If a dream feels personal or a series of dreams are extremely vivid and detailed, what kind of significance would you assign to them? Not sure. Well, I'll riff on that a little bit. Not sure how to answer that specifically. Vivid and detailed. I would say that when dreams are like that, they're urgent. They have something to tell us that they really want us to get, so they're trying to make an impression. I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with whether they're either personal or more than personal dreams. But I could be wrong about that. So, but in my experience, it's more about the dream saying, this is really important. You need to get this. This is something to pay attention to. So that's what I would tend to do with it. That's what I do tend to do with it when I have dreams like that. So I hope that helps. So I want to thank all of you for being here for this this experiment of mine. It's helping me get a sense of how to do this better, and I'm always open to feedback as well. So if you want to give me some through my website, you can do that, or if you my email's not hard to figure out. It's my name, so craig@chalkwist.com. If you want to email me and let me know how you thought this went, then feel free. So thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Have a good Saturday.